An unimaginable scene that's really quite tough to even fathom. Bodies being loaded into an 18-wheeler in Brooklyn, New York. The man recording the shaky video, his voice quivering.
Please stay inside. Please pray for the people.
As new grim estimates put the potential death toll when all is said and done as high as 200,000 in our country alone. More than 500 dead in America in just the last 24 hours. Much of the focus on this coronavirus emergency is now on the epicenter here in New York. A field hospital has been set up in Central Park. A Navy hospital ship has now moved in. This weekend, the president extending federal guidelines urging all Americans to stay at home until the end of April. But across the country, the response is fragmented. States ordering restrictions on residents from other states coming in. States competing with others for critical resources. The New York governor lashing out today.
There are no red states and there are no blue states and there are no red casualties and there are no blue casualties. It's red, white, and blue. This virus doesn't discriminate. It attacks everyone. And it attacks everywhere.
Typically, Americans come together in times of crisis, but are we doing the same in this moment? Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. As we draw closer to the end of another month that we will never forget, we start the show with this image. This is a graph of the coronavirus cases at the beginning of the month, and with 1 day left in this month, this is where we are now. Almost half of the cases are here in New York. This region is reeling as the death toll continues to spike. Some states like Florida, as you can see in this drone footage, are now putting up checkpoints, singling out New Yorkers and travelers from Louisiana, New Jersey, and Connecticut, instructing them to isolate for 14 days. But what is happening in these regions, experts warn, will happen in most of the country if people do not stay at home. And that's why we begin tonight with the story of one town in rural Georgia dealing with the same challenges those of us here in New York now know all too well.
This isn't the big city. This is small-town Georgia with few stoplights and even fewer hospitals. And they, too, are struggling with the coronavirus. The health crisis is here. And so far, 27 people have died in these small rural communities since the outbreak began late last month.
It just shows you, you're not safe in rural America, small urban. This isn't just for the big cities. It's for all of the United States. And we need to be vigilant in what we're doing to eradicate it.
The Phoebe Hospital System serves a number of rural counties in southwest Georgia, and the campus in Americus is the home hospital for President Jimmy Carter, who lives in nearby Plains. Nearly 500 people here have tested positive for the coronavirus, and they're still waiting on test results for another 1,000 or so patients. The Georgia National Guard has sent doctors and nurses to help. All of the beds in the ICUs are full.
We have had some transfers, and you can imagine there's not a lot of hospitals willing to accept or wanting to accept a positive COVID patient.
28-year-old Terica Parks is one of the many who got sick.
I was at home, and my symptoms began to get worse. I continued to vomiting blood. My fever, I was in a fetal position in the middle of my bed because I was in excruciating pain. And so I was crying, like just crying and like, it was terrible.
Health authorities have traced the outbreak to a funeral on March 7th and another on February 29th. Both were attended by families from 3 different houses of worship. Terica Parks went to Sunday service at one of the churches.
I was at the church on the 10th, and on the 14th, I started to feel weird. I thought maybe I had like a stomach bug.
By the time she got to the hospital, she had a fever greater than 102.
They explained to me they had a short time frame to get this medication in before my organs started to shut down.
Carly Rise is a nurse here.
Yesterday, I had to FaceTime a family member so they could say goodbye to their mom, their aunt, their grandma. And it is so hard. They had to bring a phone up here because we're not allowed any visitors. And I had to go in the room and call them and FaceTime them from the room and show them their family member. It's hard to hear someone else cry over their family, because you start thinking about your family if this was you and all that.
For the medical staff, it's overwhelming, and not just at the hospital.
I am taking this video because I think people need to see what's happening.
Dr. Enrique Lopez is living out of his garage because he doesn't feel safe living inside his home with his family.
If you were going to show me this video several weeks ago and told me that this would be where I'm living, I would have never believed you. Several weeks ago, we had heard about a virus that came from a place far away from here. And I didn't think much of it because we are the United States of America. We are the most powerful country in history, and we have more of everything than we need. We were wrong. We were wrong in an epic way.
In one rural county here, more people have died from COVID-19 than in any other county in the state, including the state's largest counties in and around Atlanta. The concern and fear are so great, more than 900 people who felt sick and crowded the hospitals have tested negative for the coronavirus. Georgia's governor has stopped short of ordering a statewide lockdown and is one of the few remaining governors to do so. City and county governments here have issued those orders instead.
We are getting some reports. Most of our businesses are in compliance, and I know that there's nothing insidious about this, but convenience stores particularly, we have to minimize the number of people who are inside the stores.
Like many here, Terica Parks is now on the mend.
Hey you guys, as you can see, I am finally free again. I am out of quarantine. I'm actually outside in my backyard. I still have not hugged my kids yet. It has been since the 14th, but it feels like it's been forever. So I'm excited. I'm getting ready to hug my kids.
She reunited with her family on Saturday. Theirs was the sound of joy that's been missing here since this outbreak began. They warn everyone to do whatever is necessary to prevent this virus from hitting home. Steve Osunsami, ABC News, Atlanta.
Love seeing that hug, and our thanks to Steve Osunsami for that report. And here in New York City, some of the most iconic sites juxtaposed with haunting images. The so-called crossroads of the world, Times Square, a virtual ghost town, a section of New York's famous Central Park now populated with makeshift medical tents. ABC's Chief National Affairs correspondent Tom Llamas takes us inside the city's crisis centers, which sadly may soon be replicated in other parts of the country.
Please stay inside. Please pray for the people.
Tonight, the governor of New York says the situation is painfully clear, and these images show it. A body loaded into a refrigerated truck outside this Brooklyn hospital. The city bracing for a mounting death toll, more than 1,200 lives lost.
We've lost over 1,000 New Yorkers. To me, we're beyond staggering already. We've reached staggering.
Help sailing in today. The naval hospital ship the Comfort pulling into New York Harbor, the 1,000-bed facility ready to take on extra non-COVID-19 patients. In the heart of Manhattan, a new field hospital specifically built for COVID-19 patients.
We've done this in war zones, in earthquake zones, and things like that, so we know how to do this. We've never done it in some place like this before.
The group Samaritan's Purse building it in just days.
Starting tomorrow, this is going to be a working intensive care unit in the middle of Central Park, complete with hospital beds, ventilators, overhead lighting, even a negative pressure tube sucking all that contaminated air out, making sure the room is sterilized.
As New York is pushed to the brink, health experts warn the potential U.S. death toll could soar as high as 100,000 to 200,000 people.
I think it's entirely conceivable that if we do not mitigate to the extent that we're trying to do, that you could reach that number.
The president forced to reverse an earlier proposed plan to reopen the country by Easter, now extending social distancing guidelines to April 30th. Dr. Anthony Fauci saying the task force argued strongly with the president to extend them, and the president listened.
Challenging times are ahead for the next 30 days, and this is a very vital 30 days. We're sort of putting it all on the line this 30 days.
Tonight, we're learning one of the latest victims is pediatric neurosurgeon Dr. James Goodrich from New York's Montefiore Medical Center. The world-renowned doctor making medical history when he successfully separated conjoined twin boys during a 27-hour surgery. Doctors across the country struggling to help families unable to visit their loved ones in the ICU.
We make it a point to call families twice a day, but I can't imagine being that person on the other end, having to wait for that phone call, never knowing what sort of news you're going to get.
An emotional toll also on nurses who are so often the critical link between patient and family.
I just came from a patient's room. He's actively dying, positive diagnosis of COVID-19, and his family can't come, so I had to FaceTime his family, and it was just so heartbreaking.
In New Jersey, 8 patients dying at a single nursing home. And 911 call centers stretched thin as well. In New York, a record 6,000 calls in one day. First responders also hit hard. About 5,000 members of the NYPD are out sick. More than 900 officers and 260 firefighters testing positive. And now in New York City, a $500 fine for anyone ignoring social distancing rules.
The police and all our agencies are authorized to use fines. We've given enough warning.
Tougher penalties in Maryland as well, where cases surged 400% in just the last week. 66 residents infected at one nursing home. The governor ordering residents to stay at home or risk up to a $5,000 fine or jail time.
This region is about to be hit with the virus in the same way that some other major metropolitan areas have been.
In Louisiana, officials say they need 14,000 ventilators and fear they could run out next week.
If the metros and the rural areas don't take care now, by the time you see it, it has penetrated your community pretty significantly.
Cases spiking in cities like Chicago and Detroit. This convention center in the Motor City is going to be turned into a 900-bed hospital. And in Philadelphia, this arena at Temple University transformed into an overflow hospital after cases in that city topped more than 1,000. And tonight in Los Angeles, the Naval Hospital, the Mercy, already taking on extra patients to ease pressure on so many hospitals.
And Tom Yamas joins us now. Tom, just devastating stories. Curious, though, as you report on the human toll, what strikes you the most about this crisis?
You know, Lindsay, I still hear from friends in other parts of the country, and they ask me, is it really as bad as it looks on TV? And I'm always shocked by that question because I tell them it's actually worse. And it's not to scare them, it's not to panic people, but we can't be in every hospital. But we're hearing from so many doctors, and they're telling us it's really bad. And then I always tell people the stat that I've been repeating. You know, over the past couple of days, on average, every 6 minutes, someone in New York is dying of COVID-19. When you hear that, it stops you in your tracks. It lets you know just how significant and serious this issue is. We have a massive naval hospital ship now on the west side of Manhattan in the middle of Central Park. We have a field hospital that was built in days by that Christian group. They're going to start seeing COVID-19 patients tomorrow. It gives you a sense of how real and how urgent this is. And Governor Andrew Cuomo said it today. It's happening here in New York. Tomorrow it's going to happen in your community.
Right,
Lindsay?
just every 6 minutes. That is just staggering to hear that number. Our thanks to you, Tom Yamas. The warnings are clear. No community should expect to go untouched by this. As Tom just reported, the crisis keeps intensifying. And meanwhile, there's an ongoing issue in several states. Some churches are defying orders and carrying on with church service as usual. In Florida, a megachurch pastor was criminally charged after holding a Sunday service. In Louisiana, neighbors of another church were outraged by the crowd there. That's because that state is dealing with a looming crisis, something they have not confronted since Hurricane Katrina. Our Marcus Moore is in New Orleans.
Tonight, for the first time since Hurricane Katrina, the New Orleans Convention Center transformed to deal with an unfolding catastrophe, and a usually vibrant city is bracing. This is the historic French Quarter tonight. It is shut down, and health officials fear that Mardi Gras, that brought thousands of people right here to Bourbon Street, may have helped to spread this highly contagious virus. Over the weekend, cases of COVID-19 in Louisiana soaring from roughly 2,700 on Friday to just over 4,000 today.
We still have an awful lot of work to do to try to
flatten the curve.
But that didn't stop hundreds from flocking to Sunday services at Life Tabernacle Church outside Baton Rouge.
They were all spread out, probably 1,200. So.
Some of the church's neighbors outraged.
We have a right too, man. Y'all need to shut that church down.
In Tampa, one megachurch pastor also defying stay-at-home orders.
People have gone totally crazy. As the president said, he wants to get everybody back worshiping God come Easter Sunday. That needs to happen.
But hours later, the president changed his tune, and tonight that pastor under arrest.
His reckless disregard for human life put hundreds of people in his congregation at risk, and thousands of residents who may interact with them this week in danger.
We are joined now live by Marcus Moore. Marcus, this seems like a landmine. Government officials telling church leaders they cannot hold services. What about religious freedom?
Well, you know, it's a very sensitive topic, Lindsay, and many legal experts will argue that religious freedom is a constitutional right, but not something that is absolute. So it can be trumped by a public health emergency. But you cannot help but realize the fact that this is an unprecedented time for so many people, and they want to lean onto something that they are familiar with, their faith, and for many of them, their church family. And that's what we have seen here in Louisiana this weekend. But I should point out that other churches that have continued to gather together, they've done that virtually, using live streaming on the internet to hold church services without putting so many people in such a close space.
Yeah, really a gray line with that separation of church and state. And also, Marcus, what are you hearing officials say about the state of Louisiana being prepared to deal with this crisis?
Well, Lindsay, they are preparing. They are right now, as you heard in that piece, preparing the convention center with 1,000 beds. They are also really reminding people and urging them to stay home, because even this weekend there were gatherings, including a second line that police broke up. And the governor has said that anyone who is ignoring the stay-at-home order that's in place here in Louisiana right now, that is grossly irresponsible. And then those that do, they are taking precious time away from first responders and almost making it more likely that this virus will spread.
All right, Marcus Moore, thank you very much for that report, Marcus. Now to the latest on the group of passengers stranded at sea. Their coronavirus-infected cruise ship is trying to dock after 4 people have died and many on board are reporting flu-like symptoms. The ship has been turned away by other countries, and leaders here in the U.S. are also calling for the ship to find another place to dock. ABC's Victor Kendo is in Florida and joins us now with the latest. Victor?
And Lindsay, Florida's governor has made it clear he does not want any more sick people coming into the state, and many of the officials in Broward County would agree. They're actually holding an emergency meeting tomorrow morning to decide whether or not they're going to allow those ships to dock at Port Everglades in Fort Lauderdale. Now, here's the latest with those ships. Holland America says their 2 ships have made it through the Panama Canal and could be here in just a few days. They have transferred passengers who are not showing any symptoms from the Zaandam to the Rotterdam. Guests on both ships will be confined to their rooms throughout their journey. Nearly 200 passengers are sick. 2 have tested positive for COVID-19. 4 have already died, including 1 American. There are simply not enough tests for everyone. Florida's governor says, we think it's a mistake to be putting people in southern Florida right now, given what we're dealing with. So we would like to have medical personnel simply dispatched to that ship, and the cruise lines can hopefully arrange for that. Tend to folks who may need that medical attention. Governor Ron DeSantis also monitoring the roadways over the weekend. He ordered checkpoints on I-95 along Florida's northern border to screen travelers for COVID-19 hotspots, possibly coming in from New York and even Louisiana, where Marcus just reported we're seeing a spike in cases there. And those new travel restrictions follow a similar order we saw last week, where visitors coming in from New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut are being told to quarantine for 14 days under the threat of 60 days in jail. Lindsay?
So, Victor, there are some strict rules in place, but why is there no statewide shelter-in-place order for Florida?
Well, Lindsay, the governor has been kind of hesitant to issue any kind of statewide order here, basically coming down to the fact that he believes that some of the more rural areas in the state don't need a shelter in place here. Different story, though, in southeast Florida, where we are, where about 60% of the COVID positive COVID cases are found. Now we're talking about Palm Beach County down to Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe, where the Florida Keys can be found. Just today, he issued a new order, basically a shelter in place, and he's telling Floridians that we could be in this through mid-May. Lindsay?
It was only a couple of weeks ago, of course, that we saw those crowded beaches. Since that time, have you gotten a sense that people are starting to finally take things a little more seriously there in the Sunshine State?
Absolutely, Lindsay. And right here on Miami Beach, this park right behind me, it would normally be packed on a beautiful night like this. Same with the beaches, but those have been closed down here. Different story in some parts of the state, just south of Jacksonville, one of the beaches there. It got a little busy over the weekend, and officials were quick to shut it down because people were not following social distancing guidelines. But for the most part, I can tell you, at least where I am here, southeast part of the state, people are definitely obeying the rules. One piece of good news here, Lindsay, City of Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, he tested positive for COVID-19 a few weeks ago. He just posted on social media that he has now tested negative twice. He is very eager to hug his family. Lindsay?
I bet indeed. Some good news there, and also that people are abiding and not right behind you in an empty live shot. So we appreciate that report. Victor Akendo, thank you. And when we come back on this National Doctors Day, the healthcare providers on the front lines and their dire warnings. Terrified doctors and nurses still saying they don't have enough protective gear, and now reports of medicine shortages. The crisis overseas, the death toll still mounting in Italy and Spain, but there is a bit of a relief in some of the numbers coming in there. And later in the show, how some of the challenges President Trump has faced in the Oval Office may be instructing his moves during this crisis. But first, our myth bust of the day. Does drinking alcohol treat coronavirus?
So this here is the waiting room at Mount Sinai Beth Israel. It's Saturday afternoon, just after noon, a little after 12 o'clock, and you can see that the waiting room is totally empty. I think one of the things that really scares me about this disease is that we're not seeing a lot of low acuity patients. People are really, it seems like they're afraid to come to the hospital. Normally at this time of the day, we try to keep the waiting room as empty as possible. We want to make sure that patients can get seen and evaluated by a doctor, so we try not to use the waiting room, but it's pretty uncommon to see it completely empty like it is right now. It really just speaks to the anxiety that we're seeing in the community, that people are afraid to come to the hospital right now.
Yeah, just an eerie scene right there. And as you just saw, doctors and nurses continue to fight on the front lines of this crisis. That doctor talking about the changes that he has seen in one section of the hospital, while in other sections of that New York City hospital, the battle against COVID-19 rages on. These brave medical professionals are working around the clock and in many cases face dramatic shortages of masks and other protective gear. ABC's chief national correspondent Matt Gutman has a look inside the kinds of conditions that they're facing.
Tonight, the virus attacking frontline doctors and nurses. Miami ICU nurse Araceli Buendia Illegan, who treated thousands of patients over 3 decades, on Friday dying with alarming speed. She'd mentored her niece Joanna, also an ICU nurse, in England.
How do you feel going back to work? What does that make you think about?
Well, to be honest, I'm terrified for my life, because especially what happened to my aunt.
Dr. Arnold Weg believes he contracted the virus when a patient coughed on him.
My father is truly in the fight for his life.
Weg is a 63-year-old grandfather of 6 and a marathon runner. He's now in intensive care for the first time as a patient.
Yesterday was my parents' 38th wedding anniversary, and this is the first time they couldn't spend it together.
Hospitals now reporting drastic shortages of masks and protective gear. Doctors telling us they have a single mask assigned for an entire week. A national survey found 88% of cities do not have adequate supply of PPE.
I have nurses that call me on a daily basis to tell me that they're scared, to tell me they don't know what to do. We didn't sign up for this.
Mary McDonald recorded this video saying it's not just supplies, it's basic medication.
We're out of Tylenol. We're out of Tylenol. I don't know what I can do to save people anymore.
Tonight, California officials warning they're on the verge of a massive spike. The state has at least 5,700 cases and rising.
When the mayor says that he's seeing a surge in Los Angeles, where is that?
It's all over. So what's probably most concerning is the number of COVID-19 patients who need ICU admission doubled over the weekend.
But testing is slow. On average, it's taking 7 days to get results.
We have currently over 60,000 tests waiting for results.
One doctor on the front lines facing a cruel twist of fate. This moving image showing Arkansas medical resident Jared Burke's social distancing from his own 1-year-old son, Zeke. And then on Saturday, an EF3 tornado destroying his family's home.
It felt like the house lifted up and then slammed back down. I was saying, God, I'm not ready to die yet. And luckily, I guess he heard me because I'm still here.
And north of Seattle, the latest example of how infectious the virus can be. A choir meeting on March 10th for a rehearsal after the outbreak had started. They tried to practice social distancing and used hand sanitizer, but tonight, 45 of the 60 who attended are infected. At least 2 have died.
And Matt Gutman now joins us live with more. First thing that struck me was that they said they're out of Tylenol. But let's talk about testing here. The California governor told you that they are the wait for results. I think he said 60,000 tests. People are still waiting to get results. He called it alarming. So what's the state doing to try to change that?
Well, let's just get to that alarming part. That means that there are probably thousands of patients out there who are COVID positive who might be out in the public still. They are trying to get testing in more cities, but the problem is there is no centralized testing regime in the whole state. So it's county by county. To give you an example, LA had 0 testing by the county over the past week. Now it's up to 2,000 a day. They hope to get up to 10,000 a day next week. But again, the issue is that lag time right now taking 7 to 12 days. They need to get it down to 24 hours to 48 hours for it to actually make a difference, Lindsay.
All right, Matt Gutman, our thanks to you. And we still have much more to report out tonight. The severe weather outbreak, the harrowing images coming in, the threat, sadly, is not over. And our closer look at the different approaches that some states are taking amidst this crisis. But first, our tweet of the day, what the police in D.C. are playing while they tell people to stay inside their homes. Much of the U.S. is obviously gripped with the impact of COVID-19, with more than 159,000 cases nationwide. So let's take a look by the numbers at just how states are responding. As of tonight, at least 38 states plus Washington, D.C. have announced the closure of all non-essential businesses, with cases multiplying by 4 times in the past week in the Washington metro area. Maryland and Virginia's governors have announced stay-at-home orders today for their states, but there are still 13 states that have not not issued a full statewide stay-at-home order. That includes Florida, Texas, and Georgia, which are now seeing cases of COVID-19 double every 3 to 4 days as experts fear that they could become the next hotspots. Florida now has at least 5,700 cases with at least 71 deaths, some fueled by the spring break beachgoers who appear to ignore concerns about COVID-19. Yesterday, the governor of Texas expanded an executive order requiring 14-day self-isolation for out-of-state travelers, including from hard-hit New Orleans right next door. But with no statewide order, at least 18 counties in Texas have acted on their own, with cities like Houston and Dallas issuing stay-at-home orders. And today, the Navy announced that a 200-person Navy medical unit will head to Dallas to assist medical efforts there. Only 2 states so far have reported no deaths at all from COVID-19, Wyoming and Hawaii. And we still have much more ahead tonight on ABC News Prime. A front row at the Trump show. Next, our own John Carl talks with us about his new book and what may surprise you about the man he's been covering for decades. And dating advice during the coronavirus pandemic. James Longman has that and much more in our Good News Roundup. But first, here's a look at the trending stories on abcnews.com.
ABC News, straightforward.
A staggering new development in New York City. A field hospital popping up in Central Park to treat novel coronavirus patients, part of the all-hands-on-deck effort to combat the surge in hospitals. The last 5 days in the city, the busiest ever for EMS, with more than 6,000 911 calls a day.
This is unprecedented. We've never seen our EMS system get this many calls, ever.
More help arriving this morning. The naval hospital ship, the USNS Comfort, which will treat patients without COVID-19 to ease the hospital burden in the city, raising the New York State flag as it pulled into the harbor. In Maryland, where FedEx Field has now become a testing facility, the governor is issuing a stay-at-home order, telling residents to only leave for essential work, food, medicine, or brief exercise, with violators subject to as much as a $5,000 fine or up to a year in jail.
This virus is spreading rapidly and exponentially. In 2 weeks' time, the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia areas could look like New York.
The normally bustling streets of Moscow deserted Monday as the government orders a citywide lockdown. Moscow accounts for more than 1,000 of Russia's 1,800 cases.
The Holland America Zaandam stranded at sea for more than 2 weeks as coronavirus spreads through the ship.
So we're stuck on the ship. We can't go anywhere because we're not healthy, I guess, or something.
More than 170 people on board are already sick with flu-like symptoms, and at least 4 have died as the captain fights to get proper tests delivered to the marooned vessel.
This was Jonesboro, Arkansas. That is an up-close image of an EF3 tornado ripping through different shops. Thankfully, a lot of people were not in those stores because of the coronavirus. So they had kind of a fortunate, only a couple of injuries. No one was killed. And look at this mall. This is the damage in the mall. This tornado was on the ground for 12.6 miles, about 16 minutes. So it was cooking. It was moving fast.
Overseas tonight, the World Health Organization says Europe's outbreak may finally be approaching its peak. Spain tightened restrictions as the number of deaths there mount. The government ordering all non-essential workers to stay home. In Italy, coronavirus cases topped 100,000 today, and there were more than 800 deaths in the past 24 hours there. But there may be some good news. The total number of new infections rose by only about 2%. That's the 8th straight day of single-digit growth. In Hungary today, that country's parliament granting its leader Viktor Orban indefinite emergency powers to rule by decree. Hungary has had under 500 cases and 15 deaths. And Prince Charles is out of isolation tonight after contracting coronavirus last week. The 71-year-old displayed mild symptoms and quarantined for the recommended 7 days in the UK. The Department of Justice says it will investigate one of the most powerful members of the U.S. Senate. The DOJ is looking into several stock trades of Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard Burr that came just as the coronavirus was starting to spread across the U.S. Burr sold about $1.7 million in stocks just days before the steep sell-off. Many in key industries hit hardest by the coronavirus. Burr has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing. An attorney for the senator defended the trades by saying that they were, quote, based on public information. And now let's welcome ABC News Chief White House Correspondent Jonathan Karl. For the last few weeks, we've regularly seen him in the front row of the White House briefing room asking President Trump the key questions as the country wrestles with this growing pandemic. And he's been covering Donald Trump for decades, going back to 1994 when John first interviewed him at Trump Tower as a young reporter for the New York Post. Now, John is out with a new book, Front Row at the Trump Show, chronicling those years of coverage from New York to the 2016 campaign trail to the White House. And Jonathan Karl joins us now. John, thanks so much for joining us, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much.
So many rich stories in the book, but I want to start out by asking you about this current crisis and the president's response. How does this compare to how he's handled previous crises in his career and in the White House? And in your mind, do you think that he's changed at all as far as how he's dealing with it, or do you see the same Donald Trump that you've been seeing for decades?
Well, first of all, Lindsay, one thing that's amazing about this is really the first external crisis, really grave external crisis that Donald Trump has faced. There have been many crises over the course of his first three years, many of them in some sense spurred by his own behavior. You know, the Mueller report, the impeachment investigation, the controversy over the travel ban, the situation with separating of children at the border. But this is the first crisis that is purely external that he's had to face. And I think one thing that is amazing about watching this is how similar he is to the guy that I met in 1994 at Trump Tower. He wants to be in the middle of this. It's incredible to see him holding these press conferences. Remember, he hadn't stepped foot in the briefing room for a press briefing before this happened. This is all new. And now he is there every day, and he is seeing it the way he saw his campaign. In his campaign, he was talking about the polls constantly. He was talking about his ratings constantly. He was talking about the numbers of people that were coming to his rallies. It was all about the metrics, about how great he was doing. And with this, it's a serious crisis. I'm not saying he's not taking it seriously, but you see him talking about it in the same way. He talks about the ratings. He was marveling at the ratings for his briefings, citing a New York Times report that said that he gets more people watching his briefings than watch the season finale of The Bachelor or Monday Night Football. Marvels at that. He's talking about numbers in terms of the numbers of people infected, the numbers of people who are going to die. Very grim statistics, obviously. And he was, as you remember, very famously came out on February 27th and said that there were 15 cases of coronavirus in the United States, which was true at the time. And said that very soon it would be going down to zero. He was setting up his metrics, his numbers, and now the numbers are way out of whack. So we saw him come out yesterday because Anthony Fauci had convinced him that there was a very real chance that 100,000 Americans could die as a result of this. So he grabbed a hold of that number, he changed course, keeping the restrictions in place, but he used it up against a different metric, which were reports that if nothing was done, more than 2 million people could die. So now, again, it's all the numbers, as if it's ratings, as if it's reviews. And of course, the way he's dealt with the press on this has been entirely consistent with how he has behaved since the early days of his campaign.
And of course, the president has been criticized for spreading misinformation in his daily briefings and playing down the health threat early on, as you mentioned. So how do you handle that balance of when to directly challenge him on misleading information or just not telling the truth?
It's an interesting challenge. It's unlike any major political figure I've ever covered. And I've had a chance to be in the White House covering 4 different presidents. This one is entirely different. And the thing is, when you go into an interview with him or into a press conference with him, you've got to be prepared to fact check him in real time because you don't know what he's going to come up with. You need to have your backup. And you know, our job is not to be the resistance. We are not the opposition party. That's what Donald Trump wants to portray the press as. So but you have to correct misstatements. You have to correct factual errors. I had a fascinating experience that I described in the book during the 2018 midterms when I interviewed Donald Trump backstage at a rally. And I hit him as aggressively as I could with all of the cumulative force of all the misstatements he has made as president. And he said to me something that was fascinating. He said that he tries to tell the truth, that he tells the truth when he can. And it struck me as an amazing admission. It reminded me of something. I had a college friend who once told me, I would never lie to you unless I had to. And here was the President of the United States saying he tells the truth when he can. But the interesting thing about this experience is I interviewed, again, it was backstage at a rally. There were some 10,000 people, this arena in Fort Myers, Florida. And when the interview was over, it was a fairly contentious interview, but it was a good interview, and he seemed happy with it relatively. He brought me out from the little room where we were did the interview to introduce me to the people he was with. He was with Ron DeSantis, who was running for governor of Florida. He was with the current governor of Florida, who back then who was running for Senate, and their wives. He brought me back in and he said, "I want you to meet the great Jonathan Karl. This is the great Jonathan Karl of ABC News." You know, puffing me up, making me, and he said to me 3 separate times back there, "Are you going to watch my speech? Are you going to come out and watch? I've got a great speech. Are you going to come out and watch?" And of course, I was there as a reporter. I was going to watch his speech. So I went out, and I swear to you, Lindsay, within 3 minutes, he had the 10,000 people in that arena looking in my direction and the direction of the other reporters, in that pen on the floor of the arena, taunting and jeering at us and talking, because he was talking about how horrible we were, the horrible people. We were dividing the country. We were doing such terrible things. And all of these people suddenly were looking at me, taunting and jeering and saying these, chanting, their favorite chant is CNN sucks, which ends up being kind of a generic way of taunting all of the press, not just CNN. And I couldn't get my mind around the fact that this is the same guy who just minutes earlier was introducing me to all his friends and talking about what a great guy I was.
And, you know, anecdotally, I wanted to kind of touch on that. You tell several stories in your book about moments when you saw him outright lie, a moment that you're sitting at the desk and he's talking about a phone call. So how delicate is that of a dance of remaining the objective reporter, but calling him out, as you say, in real time?
It's a real challenge because you have to remember that when he came into the White House, his then chief strategist, Steve Bannon, said that in a famous interview in the New York Times, of all places, he said the media is the opposition party. It's not the Democrats, it's the media. That's our real opposition. And then Donald Trump himself took that on and started calling the media the opposition party. So if I act in a way that looks like I am just another opponent of the president, I play right into that strategy. We know what that strategy is. He explained it to Leslie Stahl during the 2016 campaign when Leslie Stahl challenged him, said, "Why do you say all this stuff about the media? You don't believe this." And Trump told Leslie Stahl, I do it so that when you report something negative on me, they won't believe it. And that's exactly right. If we are seen as just another, you know, like a spokesperson for the Democratic Party, we failed. But you have to correct the misstatements. So it's not an easy, it's a delicate balance, and it's one I have to do every day covering the White House. You
extensively covered Trump's rise through the 2016 campaign in your book. How much do you think that this current crisis is going to change how he runs in 2020? Do you think he's going to rely on the same playbook, or is he going to have to change his approach?
You know, I wrote this book because I had experienced I truly believed history in a way that maybe no other White House reporter had, because we've never had a president like this, and especially one that I had had such a long relationship with, that I had first met, 25 years ago, and we through the crush of the breaking news, and this has been such an exhausting news cycle. Think about it, for 5 years since he first started running, almost 5 years ago, that I didn't have a chance to look back and re-examine those moments, tell people about those moments, and then do more reporting on them. But I think that he has been, in some ways, remarkably consistent. And Lindsay, I get a feeling that as erratic and unpredictable as he is, because he is, he governs by gut, he does everything, he changes radically, swings radically, and sometimes in the same day, different positions. But in some ways, I find him incredibly predictable. I find myself feeling that I know exactly where he is going to go. You can't reflect that in your reporting necessarily because it's a hunch, but I'm telling you, it's almost always right. You know where he's going to go, even when it's a wild swing to from where he is now.
So he's predictably unpredictable, I guess, is the saying there. All right, Jonathan Karl, thank you so much. I really enjoyed. I've gotten about halfway through. I would have finished the book over the weekend, but I have a 6-year-old at home. But enjoyed the book very much. Again, his new book is out, Front Row at the Trump Show. Jonathan Karl, thank you so much for your time and for the book.
Thank you.
Next on ABC News Prime, we pay tribute to the man hailed as the dean of the civil rights movement and the French florist whose kind actions are helping grieving families tonight. If you've had a tough day, stick around with us. James Longman, he's going to try and put a smile on your face. Can you hear the applause there? on this National Doctors Day, and across the city, praise in the form of claps for our heroes, the doctors, nurses, and other first responders on the front lines, trying their best to keep us all safe, putting their own lives at risk, putting their lives on the line as this crisis grows worse here in New York City and beyond. And next, you cannot underrate the power of a smile and a laugh, especially in these challenging times. James Longman has our Good News Roundup. James.
Hi guys. I know the uncertainty about how long all this is going to last is difficult to deal with, but keep in mind that the lockdowns do seem to work. In countries where they've been in place for longer, infection rates are coming down. Italy has now recorded its lowest new infection rate since this whole thing began, so hang in there. And first up, we're really going to melt your hearts with this. A 35-year-old florist in northern France had hundreds of plants and flowers that he just couldn't sell. So rather than throw them all out, he headed down to his local cemetery in the town where he lives and put them on every single grave in there. That's where his grandparents are buried, and he said he just wanted to spread the love. And this time, of course, is really difficult for businesses, including his. Well, now, as a result, his post on Facebook went viral, and he's had hundreds of new orders for delivery. And the flower news continues in the United States. This couple had to cancel their wedding, but they'd already taken delivery of all of their flowers. So they donated them to a local care home. Have a watch.
We wanted to make people smile, and we wanted to bring joy in a time that is so dark and so full of fear and of the unknown. These elderly, they're isolated. They're in their rooms, not able to see their families, and they're not able to interact with each other. You know, we were both just overfilled with joy.
Who doesn't love getting flowers? And since we always include music on Good News, have a look at this. This is Matt Lucas, a comedian, and he's put together this funny but informative little song.
You must listen to what potatoes say. Wash your hands and stay indoors. Thank you, baked potato. Only go to grocery stores. Thank you, baked potato. If you want to have a better day, you must listen to what the baked potatoes say.
And I really wanted to show you this. Friends of mine here in the UK are part of an acting collective, and this is what happens when you ask musical theatre types to stay home. I'm thinking about trying to do one of those myself. Now, we all might be in isolation, but some of us are finding new and creative ways to date, like this guy in New York City.
I looked out my window and saw this girl dancing, perhaps to a TikTok song. I needed to say hi to her, so I waved out on the balcony. She waved back. I grabbed my tape, pen, drone, and paper. Then I wrote down my digits and sealed it on my drone. 2020 has been off to a terrible start, but I still needed to shoot my shot. She picked up my drone, and I guess it worked because I got a text from her an hour later. I asked her out to dinner, but she said how. I had to do some thinking. 5 p.m. hits. It was time for our date. Wait, where is she? Just kidding. We follow the rules. I waved out on the balcony. She waved back. I told her she looked beautiful.
You look beautiful!
So we got on FaceTime and ate our matching organic microwavable dinners together.
We spoke to Jeremy about this now viral video of his successful effort to woo his neighbor.
Even though it's totally okay to feel sad and this situation has affected all of us everywhere, I think it's still okay to find a silver lining and not have to feel like we have to be sad all the time. We could still find some joy, even if it's just a little dance here.
I really hope they get to go on a normal date soon. And John Krasinski has joined the Good News train. He's put together a little Good News show on YouTube, a little bit like us. And he's also had a mini office reunion with Steve Carell.
Good evening, everybody. We're both looking dapper. This is how I am 24/7.
I guarantee you that the bottom half of what you have on does not match the top.
I am definitely wearing jams, if anybody remembers. If anybody remembers what those are.
The power of human ingenuity is really something to behold during this crisis. Here in the UK, engineers from a Formula One racing team, Mercedes, have got together with a London hospital to create breathing aids.
If we can have a bridge, a halfway house, where you need more than an oxygen mask, but less than an invasive ventilator, then hopefully many patients can be prevented from needing to go on to a ventilator.
These devices help patients stay off ventilators, which are in short supply, and could help save lives. We'll leave you now with this image. Southwest Airlines flew a whole plane full of healthcare workers to New York City to help with the pandemic. It's the epicenter, as we know, of this crisis now. Just another example of people coming together because of coronavirus. Stay well, everyone. Be good to each other.
Thank you so much for that, James. I loved that virtual date. That poor guy, he has raised the bar for men out there everywhere. But thank you for the good news, James. And now switching gears, a central figure of one of the most pivotal moments in American history has passed away. The Reverend Joseph Lowery was an icon of the civil rights movement, responsible for organizing thousands and inspiring millions. Our TJ Holmes has his story.
The dean has gone home after a life of service that put him on the front lines of civil rights battles that shaped the nation. Reverend Joseph H. Lowery passed away this weekend at the age of 98, surrounded by family at his home in Atlanta. With his goatee, signature soul patch, and longevity, Lowery was affectionately called the Dean of the Civil Rights Movement. And while little kids may learn the name Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in their textbooks, Lowery was also right there by King's side through much of the movement. A co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, along with Dr. King, it was Lowery who helped lead the bus boycott in Montgomery that made Rosa Parks a household name. It was Lowery who delivered the demands for the Selma to Montgomery March, which led to passage of the Voting Rights Act, a defining moment of the civil rights movement. Though he retired from the pulpit and his role as president of the SCLC in the 90s, he remained engaged in public debate and politics. He was a supporter of LGBTQ+ rights, and while many of the old guard lined up in support of Hillary Clinton, Lowery was an early supporter of Senator Barack Obama. He later delivered the benediction at Obama's inauguration and received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2009.
The Reverend Joseph Lowery is a giant of the Moses generation of civil rights leaders. It was just King, Lowery, and a few others huddled in Montgomery who laid the groundwork for the bus boycott and the movement that was to follow.
Lowery's fiery, tell-it-like-it-is, yet gentlemanly style was on full display in 2006. Speaking at the funeral of Coretta Scott King and with former President George W. Bush just feet away.
Presidents and governors come to mourn and praise, but in the morning, will words become deeds that meet needs?
It was classic Lowery. In a statement on his passing, President Obama called Lowery a giant who let so many of us stand on his shoulders. A giant, a titan, an icon, or just the dean. Reverend Lowery fought and won battles for decades that changed America.
The dean, indeed, and TJ Holmes joins us now live. TJ, Lowery was once called the most prominent survival of the civil rights movement, the human and symbolic link going all the way back. You were telling me earlier about meeting him yourself several times and the words that he shared with you and the lasting impression. I want to hear that and also what you think his legacy is.
I mean, this was, we're losing an original here. And again, I know a lot of people know the name Dr. King, but they don't know the name as well of Ralph Abernathy or Fred Shuttlesworth or Joseph Lowery. These were the guys who were right there next to Dr. King through this. And Joseph Lowery was the guy in charge, essentially, of the boycott in Montgomery. He was the guy who was there and who helped with that Selma March that got the Voting Rights Act passed. These were moments that changed what this country became. That's who he was. This was a titan among titans. This was an icon. And look, I was, when I moved to Atlanta, I worked with CNN there as an anchor for 5 years, and I was blessed to be around some of these guys like Lowery and Ambassador Andrew Young. And these guys kind of showed me the way, if you will. And it's a blessing of my life to have been able to spend the time I got to spend with him. Interviewed him several times, but also just around him in Atlanta. And one of those times, Lindsay, I was telling you about, he pointed at me, pointed in my face and said, "You are the reason we don't have a civil rights movement today," saying young black folks like me and you, Lindsay, who we get opportunity and we get comfortable, right? We get comfortable and we forget there's still something worth fighting for. And that kind of sticks with you, and that will be with me the rest of my life.
And he was such a profound man, so esteemed, but also had a sense of humor. Talk to us about that moment when you talked to him after he had gotten the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Oh yeah, he was. I had him on set at my show at CNN. Just days after he got that Medal of Freedom, he was still wearing it at the time, and I asked him if he had taken it off yet, and he told me no. He was joking around, but he said, and I asked, I said, "Do you even shower in that thing?" He actually said, "Yeah, I keep it on in the shower. I just lean out a little bit so I don't get it wet." I mean, this is a guy who was at the time almost 90 years old, but that was always his sense of humor. He was just always had this way about him that you almost wanted to bow when he walked in a room. He just felt like royalty, just a regal, gentlemanly, but fiery guy.
And certainly African Americans and Americans in general owe quite a debt to this titan of a man who was arrested, shot at, organized and led countless marches. A man who, as you mentioned, known as the dean of the civil rights movement. At any other time and under any other circumstances, this funeral would have been a massive salute and homegoing that would rival that of some of the most revered leaders that we have. So now what? I mean, what's the plan as far as a funeral or a memorial service for him?
Yeah, this is just where we are now, and a lot of families are going through this, right? I had a member of my family over the weekend. Someone passed, they had to stream the funeral. A lot of people are going through this right now, but for someone like Joseph Lowery, who would get something, the equivalent of a state funeral, everybody would show up to his funeral. The biggest names in politics, and you could imagine, they can't do it because of where we are with coronavirus right now, and they have put out a statement, his foundation, saying that they're going to do a private family funeral, but they hope to do a larger public event sometimes late summer or in the fall, so we still could see that, but this is just where we are right now. But I'm really appreciative to you guys for taking the time to still give this man his props, to take time on your show. I know a lot's going on in the world, but this is a man who, no matter what's going on, deserves his moment. For sure. Could not agree with you more. This was necessary. And TJ Holmes, we thank you for bringing his story to us. Thank you, TJ. And before we go tonight, the image of the day, the Statue of Liberty and the naval hospital ship USNS Comfort in the New York harbor. We are so grateful to those sailors on board. And that is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. Have a good night.